So what I like to call Hollywood magic, and I mean true Hollywood magic, is how you turn an average-looking Asian American male into a dashing British white guy, which is what they did. So I was the inspiration for the main character in the movie 21 and the book Bring Down the House. It all started in 2001. A friend of mine by the name of Ben Mesrick, he was an author, he was a writer, he'd written 6 books, but it's fair to say that at that point in his life, his career was pretty much in the shitter. He had business school applications out and was contemplating not being a writer anymore. And I said, hey, Ben, I have a great idea for your next book. And he said, well, what is it? And I said, me and my buddies from MIT, we go to Vegas and we use math to beat the casinos. And as I said this sort of glossy look went over his face. And he said, you know what? I don't think anyone wants to read a book about a bunch of MIT nerds. Well, I took him with me to Vegas about 6 weeks later. And he got out to Vegas and saw what we were doing. And he said, oh my God, this is the coolest thing. We should write a book about this. And I said, great idea, Ben. So then we approached his publishers. And his publisher said, you know what? Interesting story, but I don't think anyone wants to read a book about a bunch of MIT nerds. And so we didn't listen to her. We wrote a book called Bring It Down the House. It was a New York Times bestseller for over a year. A guy by the name of Kevin Spacey read the book, liked it so much that he decided he wanted to make a movie about it. He made a movie called 21 that was #1 in the box office 2 weeks in a row and made $150 million off a $35 million budget. So I guess in the end, people did want to read a book and see a movie about a bunch of MIT nerds, which was cool. Ben Mesrick went on to write a book called The Accidental Billionaires, which got turned into a movie called The Social Network, which won an Oscar. So Ben Mesrick effectively won an Oscar, but I can say I made Ben Mesrick who he is today. So for you guys as data people, there are tons of what you would call your emerging markets. For card counters like myself, our emerging markets were the opening of any new casino. And there are always 3 types of people you see at the opening of every casino. There's card counters like myself. There's celebrities because they want to see and be seen at this sort of opening of a casino. Can anyone guess the 3rd type of person? Anyone? You can tell a lot about a crowd by how quickly they get this answer. What I can tell about this crowd is that they might have been at the bar until midnight last night. No, I was at a real estate conference in Orange County, and no sooner had the words come out of my mouth than a woman from the back row screams, hookers! So it's card counters, celebrities, and often prostitutes. And usually at a corporate event, there's always one guy that can't resist himself, and he kind of says it. I usually make him stand up. Everyone looks at him, and they're like, oh, that's the guy that said hookers. And he realizes that might have been his sort of career-limiting maneuver. So at the opening of the Bellagio in the late, this is probably the late 1990s, I had the pleasure of playing blackjack with Kevin Costner. And Kevin was a pretty good blackjack player, meaning he did the right thing most of the time. And he had this crew of his friends around him, which, if he were a rapper, this would have been his posse. But then for about 30 minutes, no, maybe about 20 minutes, Kevin lost, I would say, every single hand. And every hand he lost, his friends would look at me and say, God, this is like Waterworld all over again. So my second favorite story actually comes from the second NBA or the first NBA lockout. So you guys are familiar with the NBA had a lockout, again, also in the late 90s. And where do you think NBA players go when they can't play basketball? Well, they go to casinos. And I had the pleasure of playing blackjack with a bunch of the New York Knicks at that time. And I sat down with John Starks, who was known as this sort of really tough guy, didn't get drafted, was always fighting for everything he had. And John, the first thing he did when he sat down next to me at the table was order a bottle of Merlot, which I thought was the strange thing for this tough NBA player to be drinking. Well, I've since learned that you never know what an NBA player is going to drink. I'd say almost 15 years ago now, I was in Vegas, and I was just breaking into sports media. And after this, I'm leaving here to go straight to Vegas, and I'm going to be doing Sports Center appearances and analysis of the big fight coming up, so that'll be fun. But at that time, I was just breaking into sports media, and I was sitting down with a guy by the name of Jalen Rose, and Jalen had played for about 45 different teams in the NBA. And Jalen and I started, talking, and he said, hey, we know a lot of the same people. Let's grab a drink together. And I said, well, what do you want to drink? And he said, well, whatever you want to drink. And so I'm, starstruck by this NBA player, and being data-driven. My one data point is that NBA players like John Starks drink Merlot, but I can't order Merlot. So I have visions of rap videos going through my head, and I turn to the waitress and I say, give us 2 glasses of Cavassier. And to this day, I don't even know what Cavassier is. Jalen Rose, who's 6'9", big guy, grabs the waitress and said, Ashley, ma'am, can you make mine an appletini? So you never really know what an NBA player is going to drink. So back to John Starks. So John Starks goes through this transformation that I'm sure many of you have seen your friends go through. I'm sure you've never gone through it, where you start as a sober, intelligent human being, and then 4 hours later, you become a drunk, degenerate gambler. And John puts his last $500 on the betting circle. The dealer gives him an 11, and John has a 6 up. The dealer gives him an 11, and the dealer has a 6 up. How many of you guys play blackjack? What do you need to do there? You need to double down. Okay, and we'll talk about all this in a second, but you basically need to put another $500 down. Unfortunately, John does not have another $500. I pay him back, flip him a $500 chip, and I say, pay me back when you win. The dealer gives John a 5 to make 16, and John goes, man, you just jinxed me. And I said, don't worry, John, because I'm counting cards, so I still have a good sense that the dealer is going to bust and John's going to win. I said, don't worry, John, I still think you're going to win. The dealer flips 10 to make 16, and he gets another 10 to make 26. John wins his $1,000, pays me back my $500 without a word of thank you. And it was at that point I decided I would never have John Starks on my fantasy basketball team. So I really showed him. Okay, my final story before we get into the serious stuff. For those of you guys that have seen 21, you know that I'm in the movie, correct? I'm in the movie, correct? This is always the most disappointing 2 minutes of my life. I play a dealer named Jeffrey. The person who plays me walks up to me, Jim Sturgis. He says, Jeffrey, my brother from another mother. We have a witty back and forth. I have a SAG card for my speaking role. This is still not ringing any bells to you, is it? Not at all, right? Okay, so this scene, if you want to go back and watch it, it's at about 59 minutes and 3 seconds. And this wonderful scene that you guys don't seem to remember took about 3 days to film. And the second day I was out there while we were filming the cast, and so this is Lawrence Fishburne and Kate Bosworth and Kevin Spacey. They come up to me and they say, Jeff, after we're done shooting today, we want to take you out to dinner and thank you for letting us tell your story on the big screen. And I said, okay, that'll be really nice. And so after dinner, after shooting, we head over to dinner. And on the way over to dinner, Kate Bosworth grabs me and pulls me aside and she says, Jeff, and keep in mind, I'm 30 and single at this point. Jeff, I have a great idea for what you and I can do after dinner. And I said, okay, Kate, tell me a little more. She said, I think it'd be really fun if after dinner we all go play blackjack together and you can coach us and we can win lots of money. And I said, first of all, that's not what I was hoping for. But second of all, I think that's a terrible idea. And she said, why? And I said, well, we're going to the Palms Casino. They know me very well there. There's no way they're going to let me play blackjack. And she said, it's okay. You'll be with me. I'm a big star. They won't bother you. And I said, Kate, it's been a long time since Blue Crush. I don't want a big star you are anymore. But what seemed like this terrible idea after 6 or 7 bottles of wine seemed like this great idea. And we go upstairs to the casino at the Palms and we sit down to play and the floor person looks at me and says, Jeff, what are you doing? And I said, I'm here to play blackjack with Kate Bosworth, Blue Crush, big star, no big deal, right? And he said, let me check. And he calls upstairs, comes back to the table and he says, Jeff, not only are you not allowed to play blackjack, but if your little friend Kate's at the table, you're not allowed to be within 20 feet of the table. What was cool is that gave me a lot of street cred with Kate. She thought I was very dangerous at that point. And it was very dangerous. It didn't get me anywhere with her, but at least she thought I was dangerous and cool. Okay. So what I want to talk to you guys about today, and all you guys are you're doing analytics, you're making data-driven decisions. And so what I want to talk about is not necessarily statistical techniques or anything like that, But I want to give you lessons for the data-driven, things that you want to think about, things that you can convey when you talk to other people, when you try to convince them of ideas. And I'm going to tell you all these through the lens of what we did at the blackjack tables. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is probably the most important moment in my life, the moment that I really became data-driven. I was 21 years old. I had just learned this system, the MIT blackjack team, where you use data to beat the house, use math to beat the house. And every decision you make at that blackjack table is 100% objective, right? There's no subjectivity. The numbers are all played out. You know, blackjack was big data before there was even such a thing, because you have so much data about how to play the hands, and you can simulate it out. You can run a Monte Carlo simulation, and you know what to do at every hand of the blackjack table. So I sit down, and the math calls for me to bet 2 hands of 10,000. So I do, and on the first one, I get a pair of 9s. On the second one, I get 11, and the dealer has a 5 up. So everything I do here is governed by something called basic strategy, which is basically just the exact right thing to do. Pair of 9s against the 5, what do? I split, which means I get put another $10,000 down. I get to play each 9 separately. On the first 9, I get a 2 to make 11. I double that down, put another $10,000 down, and I get an 8 to make 19. On the 9, I hit it to make 19, and on the 11 against the 5, what do? I double down. I double that again. I get an 8 to make 19. I have 19, 19, 19 against the dealer's 5. How much money do I have on the table? 50,000. Like, this is always it's always amazing to me how hard this is for people to get. I was at speaking at the National Accountants Association. And I'm like, okay, you guys should be able to get this. But they couldn't. They got it all wrong. And I was like, no wonder my taxes are always screwed up. So 19, 19, 19 against the dealer's 5. I'm data-driven. I got good hands. Dealer flips the 6 to make 11, and then gets a king to make 21. I lose $50,000. This woman behind me shrieks, "Oh my God, that's my entire mortgage." I want to turn around and go, "Where the hell do you live?" Because I live in San Francisco. That's a cardboard box on the Tenderloin. I just lost $50,000. And now the math actually called for me to bet 3 hands of $10,000. And this is one of those moments where you kind of reflect and you're like, how did I get here? Well, I graduated from MIT in 1994 with a mechanical engineering degree that I've never used in my life, sort of the bane of my parents' existence at this point. And then during that time, a lot of people were going into finance and whatnot, but I eventually went into the whole internet thing. And I always, the whole Al Gore internet thing, the joke is really old, but I like to say Al Gore invented 2 things, one good, one bad. He invented the internet, which was certainly a very valuable thing for us. We wouldn't be here right now. That's a great thing. But then he invented global warming, which has kind of been bad for us, I think. That's a funny joke, guys. I don't care about your political beliefs. That's still a funny joke. Okay, so then during the whole time, I realized sort of when this book Moneyball came out and with some of the stuff I had done in blackjack, that really my passion was around sort of analytics and trying to figure out how you could use analytics in different areas. And I actually started a bunch of companies, internet companies that we sold. So CircleLending, we sold to Richard Branson at Virgin. Citizen Sports, we sold to Yahoo. And 10Xer, which is the company that I most recently started, which was all around trying to find ways to use analytics to better manage people or to better motivate people. Most recently, that we sold that to Twitter, and I actually work at Twitter now, which is a great place to work with tons of data and tons of interesting problems to solve around data. But during this whole time, from 1994 to 2001, I was a professional blackjack player. So what does that mean? And what's fascinating about blackjack is it's sort of this ultimate petri dish to understand how to make better data-driven decisions. And the first one is this idea of favoring data over gut. So the average blackjack player loses about 3% of the money they put on the table. If you just play basic strategy perfectly, so basic strategy is this matrix that you see on the board. And on the left side, there's the player's hand, so that's what you have. On the top, there's what the dealer is showing. Based on that, you can go through this matrix and you can understand what you should do at any hand at the blackjack table. Okay, and this is done through computer simulation. They know this is correct. And if you do this perfectly, it reduces the casino's edge down to 0.5%. You're almost playing an even game. But what is so fascinating is that people that know basic strategy don't actually do it. And why is that? Why do they not do it? Well, there's a lot of biases, I think, that we all have in our lives. And if you think about being data-driven, one of the best reasons to be data-driven is because humans are bad at making decisions. We make emotional decisions. And if you are data-driven, you can avoid making those mistakes. So the first mistake is this mistake of omission bias, which is basically favoring inactivity over activity as you make a decision. So let's say that you have 16 and the dealer has a 9 up, and you say, hey, what should I do here? And I tell you, you're supposed to hit, because definitively you're supposed to hit in that case. But if you get a 6, a 7, an 8, a 9, a 10, a jack, a queen, a king, you're going to lose right away. A lot of people would rather say, I'm just going to stand and hope that the dealer busts. But that's the wrong thing to do mathematically, and that's falling for something called omission bias. And for a long time in my life, I didn't completely understand this. And I wrote a book called The House Advantage, Playing the Odds to Win Big in Business, which is available on Amazon right now if anyone wants to get it. I can wait. No, this book, one of the reasons I wrote it was I wanted to write a mainstream book on analytics that people would read, that weren't just statisticians or big data people or machine learning people. I wanted to write a truly accessible book. And so as I was doing PR for the book, I talked to a producer at Good Morning America, and she said, hey, Jeff, I love your story. I love these concepts, but we are not a business show. We need examples of how this stuff applies to people in their everyday life. And I said, okay. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, I don't really have a good example. But that all changed about 4 years ago. I was preparing, I just finished up a speech in Lake Tahoe, and I was driving back to San Francisco, and I was about to do a 10-city speaking tour of Asia and Southeast Asia. And as I was driving, my phone rings, and it's my dad. And my dad says, my parents live in Boston. I was, driving back to San Francisco. My dad says, son, I have some bad news for you. And he says, well, what is it? And he says, well, your mom has suffered a stroke. And I said, oh, is it bad? And he said, yeah, it's really bad. And so I canceled my Asia trip. I flew back to Boston. And it turned out that indeed my mom's stroke was bad. She could not move the entire right side of her body. She could not speak, and she could not acknowledge me when I walked in the door. And as we sat down with the neurosurgeon, he said, I want to go over your options with you. And we said, okay, well, what are they? And they said, well, normally a woman in this situation with a bleed this bad, we don't do anything for a few days. We just kind of sit back and we hope the blood resorbs. We hope she gets her faculties back, but we like to do nothing. And I said, well, what are her chances of surviving if you do that treatment? And they said, well, she has about a 22% chance to survive past 60 days. I said, I don't really like those odds. Do we have any other options? And he said, well, what I would actually recommend is being a little more aggressive, a little more risky, and going in and proactively operating and taking the blood clot out. But it's risky. You could be causing more damage to her. You're going to put her on the ventilator. There's no guarantee she's ever going to come off it. And it's risky. And as he's saying this to me, visions of this whole idea of hitting 16 versus a 9 and the people that are passive and just kind of hope, even though it reduces their chance of ultimately winning, it delays. And I thought, this is omission bias at its finest. I stand up, I start talking about this. I tell my sisters and my dad and the neurosurgeon, and they're all looking at me like this blackjack shit has gone to his head. But as I get done with my 15-minute diatribe, they realize that I'm right, and we decide to operate. And so they operate, they take the blood clot out. A day later, my mom starts to perk up. 2 days later, my mom is wide awake and starts to speak. And I felt confident enough that I decided to go on the rest of my Asia tour. And as I was leaving, I said to my mom, just want to make sure that, in 9 months I was getting married. Just want to make sure, Mom, you can dance with me at my wedding. And she goes, that'll be no problem. So I'm proud to say that 9 months later, my mom did dance with me at my wedding, and they just moved out to the Bay Area, and she's able to do many things now that we never thought she'd be able to do. She still has trouble saying what she means to say, but as you can tell, that kind of runs in the family. But a lot of the ability to make that difficult decision, I really owe to this idea of blackjack and omission bias. Some other great lessons in the idea of favoring data over gut is the fallacy of the gut feeling. So who I like to call the most dangerous human being in the world is Malcolm Gladwell. Okay, Malcolm Gladwell is an unbelievable writer, and he can take these unbelievable concepts and make us all believe them. But oftentimes they're just not totally correct. The idea of the gut feeling of being able to blink and make a better decision than actually using data to make a decision. Right? I always say to people, if you're making a decision, do you want more information or less information? You guys have seen those like cellular phone commercials where they have the kids sitting around and they're like, do you want more or less? Well, it is that simple. You know, if I have a chance to have more information, I want more information to make a decision. And that's the whole idea of data-driven decision making. And then finally, looking at the decision and the outcome and separating the two of them is so important to understanding how to be data-driven, especially understanding how to convince people to be data-driven. Right? It's very easy if we go to a casino tonight for us to sit there and I'll stand behind you. And we're actually working on bringing me out next year to the Global Summit out in Vegas, where I can probably just stand behind you at the tables and tell you what to do, probably not within 20 feet, but close. But I'm standing behind you, let's say next year in Vegas, the dealer has a 16, sorry, you have a 16 and the dealer has a 9 up, and then you say to me, hey, Jeff, what did you say I was supposed to do here? And I say, hey, you're supposed to hit. If you get a 5 to make 21 and win, I'm a genius. But if you get a 6 to make 22 and lose, I'm a moron that they never should have made a book or a movie about. But in both cases, that decision was 100% correct. One was just a poor outcome, and one was a great outcome. So there's this idea of being outcome biased, and what we always say is, hey, focus on the process, not the results. If you have great process, you'll always eventually have great results.